Hi, everyone. I'm Kurt Romer, Chief Security Strategist with Citrix and a member of our Office of the CTO. When talking about security and talking about multi-cloud, there's typically a lot of comments around features and different things that need to be out there to help assure delivery. Today, we're going to talk beyond features and really talk about some of the essential security practices that help you automate your hybrid multi-cloud environments. The reason for this is because, while features are a lot of fun to talk about, they have to be built together to really produce the desired outcomes. And what if instead we could go ahead and codify the outcomes so that we know programmatically what's going to happen? We can audit against those very easily if we want to look and see what went wrong or what went right. And we can very easily share those and update those as we're extending out to other environments or performing additional upgrades. So by codifying and by doing this programmatically for automation, we're really setting ourselves up for operational excellence. And as you'll see, there's definitely some great reasons and drivers for that. The three big drivers are, first of all, we know a lot of workloads are shifting up to the cloud. And what that means is people's desktop experience, their workspace, a lot of their databases, their applications, these are all moving to the cloud. In fact, there are a lot of organizations these days that have absolutely no on-premises equipment, no data center, no on-premises applications. I know it sounds really weird for those of us who have been in IT for decades, but we're seeing that happen. And from a security perspective, it's quite a bit different than on-premises. And we're going to talk about that from an architectural perspective, and also from some of the things that you can do to help automate around it. But keep in mind, this is very much a driver, and more so in 2020 than any other time. While all these applications move to the cloud, they're also getting much more complex. I get notifications several times a week of new application updates and new features and new ways of doing things and new integrations. And it's fantastic from a usability and a function perspective. But as you're going through and scaling these applications, as you're trying to manage traffic, as you're trying to move them around to the best place for them to run, that makes it a lot more complicated. So let's talk about some ways that we can measure this, and we can also design around the complexity so it's built into the configurations, but not apparent to the administrators or to end users. It's something that's managed for them in the background. And then, of course, we're all very familiar with what has been happening on the security front this year. Phishing and ransomware have run rampant. And we also see a lot of cyber attacks going directly after applications, after databases, and increasingly going after APIs. One of the problems is we've had an enterprise security and trust infrastructure that over the past couple decades has served us extremely well. When we're looking at this from an organizational perspective where IT owns and manages everything. But once we move out to the cloud, it's a little different and it requires a different solution. It's why many are talking about zero trust these days. What zero trust means is that you don't implicitly trust anything in the environment. You don't trust networks, you don't trust workstations, you don't trust applications, you don't even trust users. And you've got to go through and verify that people are who they say they are, completely verify identity, verify authenticity, have attestation that security can actually be performed at a certain level. And once you've gone ahead and declared that state of zero trust, you need to build upon that secured foundation. And in building upon it, you have to make sure that absolutely everything you do is continuously situationally aware and contextually risk appropriate. What this means is that as situations change throughout the day, week, month, year, new locations, new devices, new networks, new applications, new projects, new customers, new teammates, the system is automatically noticing that there are these new situations and adapting to those. And then by being contextually risk appropriate, you're making sure that risk is managed to be commensurate with the project you're working on or the action that you're trying to take. If you're just out there checking the weather or checking stock prices, you don't need the ultimate in security. But if you're making the biggest change to your entire cloud ecosystem, maybe you need a lot more security. And that's why being contextually risk appropriate is extremely important. In terms of doing this, you have to define policies. And when you define these contextual policies, I like to consider them around what I call the 5 W's of context: who, what, when, where, and why. You're looking at identities, you're looking at personas, you're looking at devices and their capabilities. You're looking at whether something's appropriate for somebody's role, whether they're getting in a normal working time for them or a normal time during the quarter for them to be making specific updates. You're looking not only for geospecific information for regulatory compliance, but you're also looking for things like impossible travel. And lastly, even if something is appropriate for someone's role, are they overextending their boundaries by asking for this information right now? In other words, are they maybe trolling for some info that, even though they do have legitimate access to, really isn't appropriate right now? And you need to combine these 5 W's of context in everything you do. And this is especially important when you're automating. Many things that trained administrators and people who are very well experienced might notice as they're going through a process that seems a little different, the automation routine's not going to. So you've got to build that in for it. And this is a great place to start. So let's get on to our agenda now that we've done some initial setup and described a lot of why we're talking about what we're talking about today. First of all, we'll look at architectures for hybrid multi-cloud, and then we'll get into some of the specific automation opportunities for application delivery controllers in general, for the web app firewall, for being able to manage the bots that are either helping us to control our applications or attacking our applications. We're also going to look at APIs, and with the new API economy and APIs driving a lot of connectivity and application usage, we need to have much better control over APIs and much better security visibility into them. Identity and access management is extremely important. Scalability is extremely important. And visibility and being able to actually report on your operational environment is paramount in showing your success. So as we jump into this, remember that hybrid multi-cloud is more than just having an on-premises cloud plus Microsoft Azure, plus Google GCP, and plus Amazon. You've got much more than that. You've got edge devices and increasingly an edge presence that allows you to have some offline access, some caching, some availability, even if networks or clouds are unavailable for a little bit. You have all these services on the back end, cloud access security broker, cloud content delivery networks. You've got hyperconverged infrastructure, intelligent traffic management, web app firewall, and you're spreading these across networks that maybe somebody's dedicated gigabit network if they're that lucky. But you have other people who are on cellular and are on satellite networks and networks that may have significant latency and significant bandwidth issues as all the rest of the family is trying to work from home these days. So remember, when you're looking at hybrid multi-cloud, it's not just about the clouds themselves. It's about the overall experience, and you need to design for that. And from a use case perspective, most people talk about clouds as being able to take advantage of some of the capabilities, some of the pricing that might be built in that's different between Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, specific regulations and using gov clouds and others that keep data in country. But remember, we can also leverage this for the business to be able to meet service level agreements as people maybe are moving to work from home, or you're moving a call center for 24/7 follow the sun. You've got to keep in mind performance, you've got to keep in mind availability, and definitely map around a lot of those. But you also have to allow for offline usage when it makes sense. Hybrid multi-cloud is also a great way to take some of the older infrastructure and combine it with some new infrastructure for DevOps and DevSecOps to help to bridge an organization who's moving forward. You might have some legacy applications and some legacy data and databases that really need to move into the cloud, but you're not ready to go all in yet. Hybrid multi-cloud is going to be your friend there. And then one of my big favorites, many organizations are taking a look at this opportunity here in 2020 as a way to go out and do some mergers and acquisitions, or maybe divest of portions of the business that aren't as strategic as they used to be. Oftentimes, when you're combining businesses or moving them around, it helps to be extremely agile. And so if your organization is buying a company that runs on Google Cloud and you're on Microsoft Azure, you really need to have some experience in Google Cloud to be able to integrate them. So have some projects out there, work with your M&A teams and make sure they understand just how important this is, and set up your infrastructure to handle this use case specifically. And then from an app and API perspective, there's a lot of great reasons to engage hybrid multi-cloud and have those use cases. And they're around performance, availability, and cost, of course. So let's talk a little bit about architectures and what's different. In the old days, you had the typical three-tier architecture with the web layer, the application layer, the database layer. You had firewalls between all of these layers. Data was extremely well controlled and managed. Only certain ports were opened, and you knew the data flows. Then it got a little more complicated, where you had some services introduced, and they were hairpinning through the data center, and some microservices were communicating through to different places in the network than the three-tier architecture. Then it got even worse, and these services are talking to each other. And then you get into the situation where you've got a full service mesh. How do you handle security in each of these specific pictures? Well, the one on the left, the three-tier architecture, was pretty easy to have static rules for, and you knew when things changed for the most part. In the dynamic service mesh, DevOps are constantly going through a CI/CD process, and you need to make sure that your specific security rules are keeping up with that, giving you the visibility and control to handle that continuous integration and deployment. Also, from an architectural perspective, keep in mind experience is paramount. Keep in mind that you need to be able to troubleshoot as well as optimize and manage. Make sure that you understand all the resource locations that are involved, and sometimes these can even include containers, which gets interesting. And along those lines, know that you can dynamically utilize each of the 4 delivery methods, which are direct, proxied, virtualized, and containerized. How this applies to multi-cloud is as follows. I'll go ahead and just build this out. So when you let people go direct to a resource, they're typically getting the best experience from their endpoint. So if they're looking at a video on YouTube, you don't want them hairpinning through the data center to get access to that, or bouncing through multiple clouds. But if you're delivering some of the most sensitive data that your organization has, you need to make sure that you're controlling that, either by delivering just the pixels through virtualization, or by carefully managing the traffic through a proxy. But if you have an offline use case or something that needs to be distributed, it's got to be containerized. The interesting thing in the past is whenever you built out an application, you had to pick one of these methods and you were stuck with it. These days, you can dynamically pick these methods at the point of service to be able to match and make sure that what you're doing is continuously situationally aware and contextually risk appropriate. And the big secret here is you can mix and match these even within a particular cloud model or a particular application. You might have extremely sensitive data that's being displayed in the application that you want virtualized. You might have user content that's coming through and being shared that you want to have go through a proxy so you can manage the content, report on it, be able to have metrics, but also be able to filter out things that are objectionable. And you might have specific videos where you want somebody to render them locally and go direct. These are all capabilities that you can have by selecting the right resource model. And from a Citrix perspective, we dynamically support you picking those resource models, and we do that for all of these reasons for both apps and APIs. Let's talk a little bit about the automation architecture for the Citrix Application Delivery Controller. First of all, we've got Nitro APIs that help you go through and provide for automation. And these are RESTful-based APIs, allow full scripting of everything within the configuration, including updates, upgrades, provisioning new services and applications, provisioning new ADCs, and even provisioning new cloud environments and managing those. You can script these with Python or with Go, and they're integrated with a workflow engine. So if you need to have approvals as part of your upgrade chain, you can definitely do that. One of the big reasons why you would want to select Citrix ADC for your automation architecture is when you take a look at load balancers and ADCs inherent in all the other cloud environments, the way that you configure those, the way that you manage those, the way that you report on those, troubleshoot those, are different in every cloud platform. With Citrix, because of a single code base across our ADCs, spanning from the development edition through the virtual edition, through cloud editions, and massively scalable appliances, you have the same code base, same configuration, same way of managing everything, and same way of scripting it, no matter whether it's running on premises or in any of the public clouds. So this gives you the capability to have consistency from a configuration perspective, upgrades, and all the way through to visibility and analytics. It's one of the big reasons to use Citrix, and it makes it a lot easier to go through and automate. When you're automating some of the ADC fundamentals, here's a list of some of the things that you'll need to think about. And I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but you definitely need to think of your ADC as a service, and actually think of it as a multitude of services. When you go through and do anything with the ADC, make sure that you're going through and doing it programmatically. You're codifying all your operations, from instantiating new ADCs to defining new users and administrators to rolling out new services and applications, and going through and as you perform upgrades and make changes, automatically record the deltas so you can go back and explain what changed. You make a change over a weekend, somebody can go through an audit on Monday and see exactly what was changed without having to make a bunch of calls and ask people. And because you did it programmatically, you know that as it's rolled out on premises as well as in all the clouds that you're using, it's consistent, it's accurate, and if you need to make any updates to it, you make some updates to the code and roll it out again. So really straightforward. A couple of other big hints in here. Use your ability to automate as part of your testing plan as well. So put together test scripts and make sure that your test cases are codified and part of delivering your ADC. So as you're doing upgrades, you're looking to see not only what changed, but also what the impact was on performance, what the impact was on availability, what the impact was on user experience, and whether there are any differences noted between the various clouds that need to be adjusted. It's also very helpful as you get new SSL certificates or new algorithms that need to be rolled out, to do this through the ADC so that you've got the consistency and you take that burden off of administrators who, if they get a phone call or a text right in the middle of an upgrade, might forget a step, and that would have abysmal results. Now let's talk a little bit about web applications. Now, with the web app firewall, it's constantly learning and looking at changes to the apps. So as you have a very dynamic development environment, DevSecOps environment, the web app firewall can keep up with that and apply those learning policies, not just to the one system that's in front of the development applications, but get it ready for rollout throughout the rest of the cloud environment. This includes the ability to do virtual patching. So if there's a patch for a specific application, whether it's yours or a third-party app, you can go ahead and write a virtual patch to be able to make sure that that application is protected, even if you can't put in the full patch at this point in time. And this gives you the ability to have additional uptime and the ability to test patches if your organization requires you to do that. The web app firewall also has a couple of other really interesting capabilities where you can go through and review the environment, take a look at what's under attack, and automatically adjust rate limiting based on some of the threats that are coming in. So you can thwart an attack without an administrator having to jump in, apply patches, or otherwise apply policy, just by being able to provide for some rate limiting. And then one of the other things that I think is really cool, being able to apply CAPTCHA if people are going through and failing authentication. So you have a normal user, maybe they fail authentication once or twice, but they're probably not going to fail it more than that unless something's really wrong. If you've got a bot or you've got a script that's going through and trying all kinds of login attempts, the web app firewall can notice that and automatically enforce a CAPTCHA on the next login attempt. From a bot perspective, these bots are things that help you manage your site, help you make sure that services are up and running, that might even be part of some of your testing procedures. But bots can also go through and fill up shopping carts and otherwise cause problems with applications. So you need to take a look at bots from an IP reputation perspective, but also from a behavioral perspective. And then in terms of hybrid multi-cloud, if you notice that there's bots that you do not want in your environment, you can go ahead and apply those updates across the entire cloud environment simultaneously, including the ability to redirect over to a DLP system or IDS, IPS, or a next-gen firewall for doing some content inspection. And just like with the web app firewall, you can also require the bots to have a CAPTCHA or send them over to a bot trap that keeps them busy doing nothing that's going to harm your environment. Nice thing about Citrix with bot protection is it's integrated with both our web app firewall as well as the API gateway capabilities that I'm talking about, so that when you're doing your scripting and automation, you can engage each of these capabilities to have a complete holistic view of the application and complete control over what you can do with the traffic, both good and bad. So speaking of API gateway, you can take a look at the Open API spec files and use those to set up resources and security methods that are very specific to the application. And the API gateway can do this dynamically. So as new APIs are rolled out or as APIs are updated, we can go through and take a look at these OAS spec files and be able to determine what changed and be able to automatically apply protections across your clouds. Very, very great capability as APIs are extremely dynamic. And we talked about that service mesh before. This is a big part of what's going on with the APIs. And it includes being able to manage some of the custom resource definitions for Kubernetes and define style books, which is a fancy word for templates. But from a style book perspective, these templates are deterministic, and they're also something that you can go through and use for gateway automation. And from a style book perspective, it's really interesting to use those to derive what the outcomes you want to be for the application and for API support, and have the system work to those outcomes, not just to specific features and next steps in the process. This gives you a lot more control over APIs and a lot better capability to make sure that you're keeping up with the changes across APIs, including managing how APIs are deprecated. Next up, identity and access management. And when you take a look at lifecycle usage across an application, you really need to consider the identity of everything. Identity has gotten to be a very complicated topic these days as organizations move to zero trust. But by building in consistent identity and access management into Citrix ADC, we can be able to script things like credentialing, bringing people on board, offboarding them, and making sure that they've got access to appropriate services. This is great for bringing on end users, but it's even more critical when you're bringing on administrators, privileged workers, help desk personnel, and others where they have very specific rights that they need. And you need to be able to audit that process and be able to show exactly what was done to set them up and that they have appropriate rights and resources and least privilege. It's also much easier to audit these if you've gone through and codified them. So very important to programmatically assign your identity and access management and be able to manage it using Citrix ADC. And then from a scalability perspective, Autoscale is a great capability that lets you define the minimum capabilities and the maximum capabilities for resources, as well as some of the thresholds associated with those. So you might get in a situation where you need additional capabilities, but it's not automatically part of the system. You can have workflow engaged to say that if there's an approval needed, it can automatically send that approval, add the additional capability at the approved cost, and even be able to move workloads between clouds for cost management as well as availability management. A lot of other things to look at here. Scalability is not just about adding new resources. It's about making sure that you're measuring those resources so that they're achieving your objective and they're not causing problems with SLAs. And so from a scalability perspective, having base and a single platform that gives you the ability to codify this and provide for visibility is extremely important. And speaking of visibility, a couple of interesting tips on here. Machine learning is really great for going through and learning what baselines are, and something you very much need to engage to look at all the baselines that you might have across your organization. From an application perspective, API perspective, development, performance, availability, make sure that you're tracking all of those various baselines. And you can also utilize machine learning to take a look at where people are using your applications from and who are some of the biggest users of the application. So it can answer questions of where you need to be spending additional time optimizing so that you're giving your best customers the best performance and you're accommodating for the regions that you need to make sure are most performant. Along with that, from a security perspective, go ahead and set up some risk and heat maps so that you know what's going on, but you also are getting notification of what might be evolving. There are new attacks coming all the time, and this can give you some advanced notification as you're looking at this consistently across all the various clouds. You might see something starting over in Asia Pacific and then see it spread to Europe and then see it spread to the US before you're getting notice from other organizations on your security alert system. So gives you the capability to do that. And then you can also auto-generate tickets in your service management system and send information over to your SIM so that the organization has a better understanding of what's going on and is prepared. The cool thing about sending info to the SIM is we pre-correlate events, so they're not just looking at raw data. When we send information, we're showing an event and not just the indicators that led to the event. So it lets you respond more quickly. And when you look at some of these analytics, from an API perspective, it tells you what the performance is of the APIs, as well as any of the specific errors associated with it. And then also you can take a look at the performance and bandwidth utilization by region. Very important as APIs are rolled out, and oftentimes in a canary process, you might start in different areas of the world or with different applications. This can give you early indication on whether things are going according to plan or whether the developers need to make a quick adjustment. And so in closing, taking a look at Citrix and Citrix ADC in terms of securing applications and APIs, you need to make sure that you're looking at this from a comprehensive app security perspective. Load balancing, web app firewall, API protection, bot protection, all the other great things we're doing. You need to be managing for price and performance within your clouds and for your overall services. And by the way, be measuring and reporting on this as well. And then you also need to be ready for what's next. You need to have a system that's flexible, that gives you the capability to say yes to your developers, as opposed to, hold on, we got to go figure out what's going on and get ready for this next month. Wouldn't it be nice to just always be able to say yes to things that allow the business to be more agile? And in terms of key takeaways, update your hybrid multi-cloud strategy with Citrix ADC in mind, and take a look at how this is going to help both IT as well as your business, and send a lot of information over to the business so that they've got some of the output from your analytics and ML and not just the IT organization. Automate as much as possible. Use the 4 delivery methods of direct, proxied, virtualized, and containerized, and make sure that you're optimizing for an overall experience that considers security, productivity, and cost, because those are the 3 levers that you need to be architecting around to keep your applications happy. With that, thank you very much. You can find a copy of this presentation as well as many other helpful resources in the Resource Center.